Exactly. We are recording, Dustin. Let's talk about how we think things are going.
Well, that's kind of funny because things have been going. Here, let's restart that. I don't know how. Okay, I gotta be more in natural conversation mode.
Okay.
Right. That's
Okay,
my
natural
thing.
conversation mode, Dustin. Stare at me.
Okay, cool. Okay,
Are you staring at me?
I'm staring at you, man.
Right at me. Okay, how do you
Yeah.
think things are going with the new Crude Patreon, the subscription service, and all these podcasts and the short documentaries that we've been dropping into?
Yeah, I'm feeling like I'm on fire right now, but as you know, that wasn't the way I felt a few days ago, and I actually had a couple days worth of panic attacks.
Yeah, I told you to take baths and listen to piano music and light candles.
Yeah. I texted you or something and was like, dude, something's wrong with me, man. My heart rate is up way too high. I don't know why. And you're like, oh, no, it's cool, man. These are just panic attacks. I used to get them all the time.
I still get them.
Yeah. You're like, just go take yourself a bath, put on some classical mellow music. And it was like, I didn't actually get to take the bath because I was just, my heart was going too much. But looking back on it, I think it's just the fact that this, basically shit just got real. And I think it was just going through that process because now a week into it, I just feel really good about everything.
Well, I think the Crude patrons that we have going for us right now that have gone in and that are supporting us at different levels, whether it's the roughneck level or whether it's the company man level, I think that is definite motivation to keep these things going.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like we're at this point now where there's so many little tasks to always be doing, and you just it's really easy to kind of like accomplish something, and we're less in this like theoretical planning mode, and now we're in the like, okay, we're doing it.
It's happening.
It's happening, and we're in it, and we're able to like look at our progress every single day in these different steps, and that's exciting, and it's exciting to get feedback from people, what they're thinking of the new podcast. Where we can improve. And yeah, I was kind of thinking about like, wow, man, this has been quite the journey to get here. Like I can think to over a year ago, I remember I'm in my school bus that I'm living in up in Fairbanks, and I'm talking to you on the phone, and I'm basically, this is probably like an hour-long conversation. We're actually coming up with like an advertiser model. Like, what would we charge? What's our plan? A strategy to bring in advertisers for Crude. And basically, what Crude would have been primarily like online editorial content. I don't know. Do you remember that conversation?
I don't remember it exactly, but I remember trying to figure out an advertising model that Crude could work off of. I do remember that. And then ultimately deciding that is not the route that we want to take.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of like, that's what I've been thinking about this week is like how long this process has actually been, how much we've talked about what we want Crude to become, putting in the research to figure out how we can best reach those goals.
Well, and I think that's just been the trajectory of Crude in general. When we started it, it was a print magazine, and my philosophy was that we were going to. There's Clyde right there, just barking.
Yep.
Okay, so that's been the trajectory of Crude this whole time. We started out as a print magazine, and the idea was that it was going to be this time capsule of these different cultures. And we were going to, the first one was a product of our environment, which was an introduction to the whole idea, right? It was kind of like this mess of different things that we will get into. It was, there were photo essays, there were, photography, featured photography. There was magazine style articles. It was and art. It was all over the place. And then the next one was a lot more focused, which was Slope Rich, and then that turned into Arrogant Minds. And then we had Legacy, which was a much more comprehensive issue. And so what I think I learned through that whole process is people are hungry for that kind of content, but we need to meet them halfway. Like how do people consume content? How do we consume content? And I think that we consume podcasts and short documentaries more so than maybe we do physical magazines,
Yeah, exactly. We spend a lot of time talking about, if Crude was going to become like a sustainable media company what would it look like? And that's kind of what we decided is like, kind of putting out these new formats.
That is more generational, that is more in the now, that people can consume faster and more easily. They don't have to go to the Crude website anymore to buy this magazine. Now you can listen to the Crude podcast on Spotify. You can listen to it soon on iTunes. You can listen to it on our Patreon. You can listen to it on YouTube. These are very easily accessible places that people frequent constantly.
Yeah, exactly. Media needs to be on demand for people, and it needs to be consumed on their schedule. We're going to stay with the same goals and motivations that Crude has always had, telling the most authentic story about Alaska as possible, creating that time capsule, right? But we're going to use these new formats, and it's going to allow us. And then one thing I think we realized was that after studying advertising models, looking at how it works, we weren't going to be able to do that through advertising. And, like you said, it's like this belongs into the hands of Alaskans and its supporters to decide the fate of our future.
And how do we get it into their hands as easily as possible?
Exactly. It's like, okay, if you're going to be paying a monthly subscription, at whatever dollar amount you decide, which is what's really cool about Patreon, how do we make sure that you're getting consistent content that matters? And these were kind of the two forms that we felt we could do this best, at least starting out right now.
Exactly.
And so yeah, it's exciting to see it happen. It's exciting to be doing it, and it's exciting to see some money start to roll in, and it's like, what are we going to do with that money? I'm sure people are kind of curious, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna buy a Tesla.
Yeah, definitely the Tesla. So what we are buying is microphones. We're buying recording equipment so we can pack it all in a backpack and meet these people that we want to talk to, these interesting people that we want to interview, and we can have all of it right there with us. And so we're on the move. One of the things that I have always wanted Crude to be is flexible.
Well,
we're able to be flexible to the medium that best suits the people.
You're not going to allow Crude to be put in a box, basically,
exactly.
Right? And it's like, as someone who has now years of experience working in journalism with different media outfits, whether it's like national or local, and someone who's had the experience of kind of seeing what works and what doesn't with Crude, is like, you want to be flexible. It's like, for the people who are going to get behind us and throw money and invest in this project, they should know that we spend a lot of time thinking about what does a successful media company look like.
And also seeing how other people our age and younger are consuming media, right? They're on YouTube, they're on SoundCloud, they're on iTunes, they're on Spotify. They're not walking down the street and sticking 75 cents into a box to get a newspaper anymore. Nobody's doing that.
No, exactly. So we've been launched for 2 weeks, and so we have about $200 per month right now, which is pretty exciting.
Shout out to all of our patrons. We really, really appreciate it. I mean, it is great to see people immediately supporting this.
Yeah, I mean, when my phone dings and it's like, it's just a random name comes up and it's like, this person decided to support Crude, it is like this like massive amount of wind behind my sails that says, keep going, keep working harder. And it's just a huge like motivational, like positive mental attitude thing.
I mean, we both have other jobs, and that makes it that much easier to just keep working right after we're done working.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's kind of something to understand too, is right now me and Cody both have jobs. We're not doing this full time, but obviously that's where we want to get to. So when we talk about what is this money going to be spent on, obviously it's going to be spent on the equipment that we need to execute this stuff as professionally as possible. But then we're going to inevitably want to grow this company and put all of our efforts into it.
Exactly.
And so that would mean being able to step away from our other jobs and being able to take Crude and produce lots of content, bring in new contributors, possibly new formats, new series. I mean, yeah, the ideas are the easy part, right? It's the money behind the ideas.
Well, I think that for us, the ideas are the easy part. I think that that for a business person, somebody who excels in business, I think that they would probably argue otherwise.
Oh, you think so?
Oh yeah, I bet they would say the business part is the easy part because they understand that, whereas they might not have the ideas.
Yeah, that's true. So what's cool is we're kind of doing both parts.
Yes, we are.
You know, we have a lot of morning meetings, right? And they'll be like half the meeting will be an editorial meeting and the other half will be a business meeting.
Yeah.
And it's like we'll come up with questions, research our next upcoming guests, and then we'll be like, okay, where are we at with our subscribers? You know, how are we going to say thank you? What
And we have 2 different levels on our Patreon, and we did that for a reason. The first one is Roughneck, and that one makes it so anybody can come in and support us. You know, from $1 to $49.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
You can come in, and if you're able to do $1, that's amazing. If you're able to do $49, that's also amazing. And then we also have the company man level, and that is $50 and up to infinity and beyond. And what that means is that those people and or companies see what we're doing and really appreciate what we're doing for journalism in Alaska. And so the first company man that we have is my Aunt Trina Duber. So shout out to Trina. Thank you. You've always been so supportive. Let's talk about Aaron Leggett.
Yeah, this is great because Aaron Leggett was actually a recommendation from the second episode's guest, David Holthouse.
Yeah. Right afterwards, right after our conversation, we all kind of hung out and had some water and more coffee. And he was like, hey, I think you guys should hit this dude up. And that was our first introduction to him. It really turned into a learning. Like, I mean, there was a certain point where I'm sitting there and I felt like he was like schooling us, you know, and we had all these questions about Alaska and he was able to answer every single one of them.
We definitely got into the Permanent Fund Dividend, kind of a little bit behind the history of it. And, basically asking the question, do Alaskans have a sense of entitlement? You know, and we explored that, and that was a really interesting conversation, I thought.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
Because you know, what's really cool about Crude Conversations and what I'm finding is happening is we are exploring the identity of Alaska and Alaskans by talking to them. And we're seeing all these different people who represent like different areas and different subcultures discuss the same themes.
One thing that I think is really interesting is that the people that we're interviewing are bringing it up all by themselves. We're not asking these leading questions to swirl the conversation back around to the identity of Alaskans. They inevitably just bring it up.
Yeah.
So Aaron his heritage is Dena'ina, and he's an Alaska native.
Yeah, exactly. And so he studied anthropology at UAA. And he's basically the curator of Alaskan history at the Anchorage Museum.
Aaron is the Alaska History and Culture Curator at the Anchorage Museum. So that means that it is his job to know about the history of Alaska, which is great because we had a lot of Alaskan questions for him. Yeah. And like I said, he was able to answer every single one of them flawlessly.
Well, and what was cool is he was able to use history as a way to like provide perspective on where Anchorage, where Alaska is right now. You know, it's like as we're looking at like, oil might not always be around. Mm-hmm. You know, what are we going to have to do? Well, we're going to have to make hard choices. And he was able to use examples in the past of why we've never had to make those hard choices.
Yeah. After re-listening to this conversation, I noticed that there's a pretty large portion where I'm very quiet. And I remember that, you know, I was like transported back to it when I was listening to it. And I was just sitting there, just, you know, I felt like I was listening to a podcast instead of being a host on a podcast. So I'm sitting there just absorbing all of this information. And I mean, we'll hear it. It's in the interview.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we won't be hearing much of you.
There's a little bit of me.
No, you're in there.
Well, I think, what do you think about getting into this?
I mean, I think it's as good as time now as any.
Mic is hot.
Mic's hot?
Mic's hot.
Is it recording?
It's record. That's what that means, dude.
Crude Conversations. Listen more than you talk.
Go to work. Welcome to the podcast, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
What's something about Alaska a lot of people don't know?
What's something about Alaska that a lot of people don't know? I think probably, I guess, well, here's one that comes to mind. I think that, we're not a huge state in the sense of population. So I think that, we're always like maybe 2 degrees separated from people. It's not, I may not know you, but I'm sure I know somebody that knows you. And I think what I've seen also in the last maybe even 10 to 12 years is our generation is not looking at Alaska as a place that's you're trying to escape from. When I went to high school, it was like if you didn't leave Alaska, somehow you were failing. I had teachers that told me I was too smart to go to UAA and things like that. But I've just like if you look at the pride blowing up, I think the fact that you look at the clothing lines, music, magazines, I think we're of the generation that we're saying, you know what, maybe we went outside and this place is fucking awesome. So, I think that would be probably something that would come to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what David Holthouse said in that podcast to us, was that for the first time it's actually cool from Alaska.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm seeing that too. There's a lot of people who are well, I've always been pretty prideful about being here, but I also notice a lot of people move here and they're pretty stoked on being able to call themselves Alaskans.
Right.
I wonder what that is. Do you think it was all the reality shows?
No, I think it's a generational thing. I think the fact that, there's a lot of people of our generation that have actually were born and raised here and consider it home as opposed to somewhere else. I mean, I think that it's just sort of this upswell. I think it's also, it's connected to getting out into the outdoors and realizing, what we have. And I mean, it's all connected to, it could be snow machining, snowboarding, could be, microbreweries. I mean, I just feel like there's more going on here. And I think probably a lot of it is, in a sense, is a reaction to when I was a kid. It was like, oh, we can't wait for all this shit to come in from outside. And it's like, once it came in, it was okay, but we had it and now we're sort of over it, I mean, I think some of it's connected to, the internet. I mean, when I was a kid, like this time of year, you couldn't do better than to be like, oh, I'm going to Seattle to go shopping for my clothes and shit. And so now it's like, well, with a click of a button, you can buy anything from around the world. But I think people are starting to realize as things start to kind of stuff we grew up with disappear, especially, local business and that kind of thing. People are starting to realize, yeah, okay, some of that stuff you can buy, but there's also that personal connection, people that actually know what they're talking about. And obviously, I'm sure you guys know that with your history with Borderline and all of that, and sort of watching it kind of rise and then kind of crest and then sort of maybe disappear for a few years, but then realizing this sort of resurgence when people, sometimes once it's gone, people kind of, forget what they had. And then they realize that it's not just being able to, go down to, I don't know, Sports Authority or something and buy your clothes and shit.
I think we're also living in a very this time.
Yeah, that's true too. I think that, I mean, our whole generation, is built on the idea of selling us back our childhood. I went to Target the other day and bought this handheld version of the Oregon Trail. So you can like literally play the Oregon Trail on this little handheld thing, and that's all it does. But
I actually recently downloaded that app on my phone.
Oh, there you
go.
And
I always get dysentery.
Yeah.
What about snake bites?
Yeah, or you get robbed or you're. Yeah, but anyways, I mean, I think there is that sense of nostalgia, but I also think that as people have went outside, I mean, there's been so many places where I've been like, oh wow, it's cool. I'm gonna go to check out this mall, and I like walk through it, and I'm like, wow, it's all the same shit I could buy or buy it on the internet and not pay a sales tax on.
Well, relatively speaking, modern Alaskan culture and civilization is pretty new when you think of it as far as like developmental phases, as far as like statehood, industry, people arriving, growth.
Westernized.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
Obviously in the sense of like Alaskan history, you can provide us with a much broader perspective on that.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting about that is also, I think what I'm starting to see is people starting to realize, when we talk about things like our economy and stuff, like the idea of how can we change the economic model of, instead of just come in, do it as fast and quick and cheap as possible, spend as little money as possible, and then get out. And that goes all the way back to the Russians. What is sustainable here? So, I mean, if you look at, whether you're talking about the Russians and fur, gold, copper, oil, fish, even tourism, I mean, it's so much of it is like we're not in control of our own economic destiny. And what I see is people starting to say, no, forget that. Like, these are our resources. Maybe there are some places we think can be developed. Maybe there's some places that should never be developed, or maybe there's things that should be done at a slower pace. Like, how can we do it, that's not based on just massively, changing, the landscape? How can you do it sustainably?
Like we're getting out of this gold rush mentality finally.
Yeah, I would hope so. But, you listen to, some of the political candidates but I think that's why our generation's so important to say, what, we want to be here and we actually want to invest in ourselves. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems that Alaskans face is that we've never paid for ourselves. And
in what way? How do you mean?
As an actual investment in our economy. We don't pay an income tax. We, what we get in services compared to what we actually pay is minuscule. I mean, the largest sort of tax that we as Alaskans pay comes, from alcohol and cigarettes. I mean, that's like the only real hardcore tax that we actually have that actually would pay for itself. I guess, well, marijuana I would add into that as well. But we don't actually invest in our own state economy. And so I think that mentality of not viewing this as your home, but just as a place where you happen to be living also reflects itself in how we look at our education system, our schools, our roads, our neighborhoods, all those kinds of things.
It's almost as if like anyone who comes here feels entitled to like extract and profit off the things in the ground.
Absolutely. Or, college kids coming up from Colorado to work, on the trains or on the cruise ships or, in the restaurants in the summer. I mean, all that money just, flees Alaska. I was listening to a debate with the gubernatorial candidates, and one of the things that Governor Walker was talking about was the Kensington mine. And he said, so what is, of the guys, you have three different schedules. You have guys that work 1 week on, 1 week off. What was it? 1 week on, 1 week off. And it was like 60% of those are from Alaska, 60 or 70%. And then he asked how many of them are 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And it was like 40%. And then 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. And then it dropped to like 10% of Alaskans. And so one of the things he said was, can't we create systems that sort of incentivize us to, employ Alaskans, not make it so easy to profit from it, so to speak. If you take a loan out from the state of Alaska to go to school, you can use it in any state. I mean, that's insane to me.
What do you think is the reason that people are staying? Our generation is staying here and having like this this lack of want to get out.
Well, I think part of it is probably in the sense because we have such a small population that if you work hard, you can really create your own destiny in a way that's much more difficult in a lot of places. So I think that's the entrepreneurial sort of spirit in a sense is much greater here. I mean, look at all the guys that have created these, microbreweries and stuff, or Wild Scoop ice cream. The girl started off with a little, push cart. She'd come out, sell ice cream on the lawn in front of the museum. Now she's got the shop around the corner from fat ptarmigan, and there's a line out the door, and she's open year round. She's creating ice cream. I mean, I think that you have those opportunities here that makes it much more attractive. I think also, I think a lot of it is centered around the lifestyle of wanting to get out and go places, drive, go fishing, obviously is a huge one, and in the winter, skiing and snowboarding and just biking, fat tire biking. I mean, God, when I was a kid, the only people you saw riding a bike in the winter were guys that like got a DUI or something like. But now, I mean, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like nobody rode their bikes in the winter, but now, I mean, it's all over the trail systems and, I mean, and some of it's technology, but some of it I think is just this more, I think as the world becomes more connected, also people are looking for a place that's a little more laid back in a sense. And you have the ability to, really make your mark.
In my mind, kind of get off the grid as well. You have places like New York, LA, Chicago, these big cities that at least me as an Alaskan coming from this type of city, this westernized city, like a western city of the United States, and you go to say New York and it's like it's overbearing.
Yeah.
And you're in the rat race.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. I think also I should mention that what I've noticed for my generation too is this sort of the cachet of being here, living here, loving it, but also having the ability to get out and go travel somewhere and have experiences.
You don't feel so trapped.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, yeah, it's that, I think, but it's also just the idea of, like I'm going to go backpack in Europe, or, I mean, I know it's a college thing, but I'm very fortunate in the job that I do get to travel quite a bit. And so all my friends are like, God, you're so lucky you get to go to all these, countries in Northern Europe. And I am lucky in a way, but it also exposes me, I think, to thinking differently. I think that also, is a big thing, is the ability to get on a plane and go somewhere. And we're fortunate, especially in the summer, to have some really good international flights. Now, it's not as cheap as if you were in New York or something like that. And you kind of wonder, like, all these people that live in New York, and yet they could hop on a plane and go to Amsterdam for $350 round trip, or never make, that kind of thing. Whereas, here we're, might cost us $8,000-$9,000, but you're going to go make that experience. I think that's what I've seen a lot of is that idea that you can get out and see other places and not just sit on the beach. I think that's what I, used to always see was like, oh, I'm going to go to Hawaii and sit on the beach. And that, for my parents' generation, that's sort of the ideal. I mean, nothing to my parents' generation was better than like, oh, I'm going to work hard, retire, sell the house and buy a condo in Maui. But, for my generation, that doesn't sound that appealing at all.
What does sound appealing?
I think, going to other, for me, in my opinion, going to other, northern places, and seeing how they do things, how they have capitalized on being in a northern place, especially Scandinavia. Just the ideas of like, you go, in northern Norway, you'll see these restaurants that will have outside seating in the wintertime. They'll put up the space heaters, they'll put down some reindeer blankets, but people, they embrace the cold. Iceland, I think, is sort of, they got to be careful on where they're going, because I think it's becoming a bit of a joke. But
what do you mean they're becoming a bit of a joke?
It's just so tourism run, like that's driving 100% of their economy right now. I should say in Reykjavik. Now, outside of Reykjavik, I'm sure it's completely different, but in the city center itself in Reykjavik, I mean, it's like being in Juneau in the summer year round right now.
Just mob. You sort of, when you start seeing like the Gray Line tour buses going out to the fjords or to the
the waterfalls and you know, the hot springs and all that, you just sort of realize something is being lost. You go through that airport and it's one of the worst airports that I've been through right now. But they had such a huge, you know, economic crash that's what they've kind of pinned their hopes on. You know, I think something like in 2010, they were getting like 800,000 visitors a year. I think last year they're at like 1.25 million people coming through, and they think by 2020 it'll be 1.8 or 2 million people coming through.
Holy shit.
Yeah. No, it's like, and a lot of it's driven by Iceland Air, the airlines, because what you can do is you can go on a trip to Europe and you can stay for up to 7 days at no additional cost, which if you've never been there, yeah, that's great. But
a free trip basically.
Yeah, but what they don't tell you is that the airport's an hour outside of the city center, so it's, you know, $50 to get in there. You know, it's unless, or you rent a car. They're just, I mean, it's a beautiful country, but you just be
They're
careful
exploiting it.
Yeah, I think in a way.
So that's interesting you'd say that. What I'm gathering is that at some point there can be too much tourism.
Oh, absolutely.
And the Alaskan economy, you know, tourism's a big chunk of our GDP. And so are we ever looking at that? Are there things we should consider as Alaskans that are negative implications of tourism?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is who controls it. You know, is it the outside cruise ships essentially? You know, is it the Holland America Princess tours, or is it the small ma and pa? I mean, it happens today. You know, how many people come to Alaska and how much of them really see Alaska? Because what they'll do is, you know, they'll take the cruise ship, they'll go up the Inside Passage, they'll put them on their buses in Whittier or in Seward, they'll drive them to Anchorage with the hotels that they've worked out the special rates. They'll load them up there. They'll go to Denali. They'll stay at their hotels.
Oh, yeah. It's an entire vertical integration model.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So in a way it's good, but it's also, it's exploitative.
It sounds like if you control how the tourists get here, maybe that's where the power lies.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that, yeah, if we get more people coming as independent travelers, you know, on the airlines, then that'll be big. And, you know, and there's local, you know, Premier Alaska's, you know, a local grown tourism company. But, you know, they're always, you know, working their angle about how to cut costs and, you know, who's the new kid on the block or who has the most favorable rate. But at the same time, I mean, I think that there are other opportunities. You know, there's businesses that have boomed in Denali, you know, Lynx Creek Pizza or 49 State Brewer. I mean, you know, there are ways to do it. You just have to be careful for, you know, what you wish for, you know.
In what way?
I think, yeah, that you don't sell your soul, you know, that it becomes inauthentic in a way. I think that's where the danger really lies, that as long as you know, keep it real, in a sense.
Like, we don't want tourists coming here and their dinner is the Denali Mac at McDonald's, basically, right? Like a commercialized version of Alaska.
Well, no, I mean, you go to McDonald's, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. It's where you go to have the salmon bake and, you know, you sit down and there's 300 people there and the crusty sourdough gets up there and talks about, you know, Prospect and, you know, here and there.
It turns into Oktoberfest.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a real good way. Yeah. As it appears in Munich. Yeah, that would be the way. I think also Anchorage is really missing the boat on winter tourism, whereas Fairbanks has really stepped up quite a bit that Alaska or that Anchorage is kind of missing, I think. But anyways, that's just a few thoughts.
Let's talk about your job for a little bit.
Okay.
Alaska History and Culture.
Mm-hmm.
You're the curator of that.
Yeah.
What does that entail?
What does that entail? Well, I think anything sort of Alaskan related, I'm sort of the go-to guy on. So when we do exhibitions on things, I mean, my area of expertise obviously is Alaska Native issues, but the fact that, you know, I was born and raised here, and I know a lot of Alaska history and culture certainly helps. You know, I've studied that for quite a few years, but, you know, it's not just based in the past. You know, it could be, again, some of the things that I talk about, like, I always joke that I remember Anchorage before we had Walmart, or, things like that.
What was that like?
It was rough. I remember when Kmart opened, they brought Kareem Abdul-Jabbar up for the opening, and
Did that really happen?
it really did happen. Yeah. Yeah.
Were you there?
I wasn't there. I had buddies that got out of school to go see it. That was in probably about September, October of '93. The joke was, you would always see the advertisements for, Olive Garden. It's like, one day if we ever got an Olive Garden, well, now we got an Olive Garden.
I grew up here until the 3rd grade, and I'd always come back from Fairbanks. And kind of what marked the change for me, kind of what you're talking about, like life after Walmart, is when they cut down all the trees across from Diamond Center,
Yeah.
paved that out, and put
Yeah.
department stores in. That's
Yeah.
that's like the total transition to a new Anchorage.
Oh yeah, no, that all happened right there in 93, 94. I mean, the other thing, just growing up here too, I mean, I think about all the places that I just as a kid sort of assumed were like undevelopable, but have now turned into things. I grew up on the east side, and so I remember before the Fred Meyers went in there. I remember before Begich was there, and it was a trailer park there, and across the street where the new Chonchnu Muldoon Park was a big greenhouse where you'd go get your Christmas trees with peacocks running around.
Yep.
And shit like that, and some of it was just sort of this building boom that sort of stopped. I didn't realize, that it was a bit of a recession at that point. Just big open fields with like undeveloped houses and stuff, but it's all been sort of filled in. But, I think a lot of it is also just, following the trends and knowing the history and realizing that we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again.
That's just humans, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but we're not that old, and you would think that we would learn from those sorts of mistakes. So, we redid our Alaska History Gallery at the Anchorage Museum that I was involved with, and it was about a $13 million renovation. And my favorite section in the exhibition is called Boom and Bust, and it goes from like late 70s through the mid 80s, really up till the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and just that sort of glitz meets sort of trash in a way. I mean, you're seeing this sort of nostalgia around it, especially in Spenard. I live in Spenard now, and sort of seeing that sort of thing, the ideas that you'd hear growing up, about like a Spenard divorce or
that's a shotgun, right?
Yeah, that's where you take the wife out with a shotgun. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or
Never heard that.
Oh yeah, there were a couple of cases of that. And the massage parlors that used to exist even until pretty recently. In fact, you guys ever get a chance, the comedian Doug Stanhope, who's performed quite a few times at Chilkoot Charlie's, has got a couple podcasts on Alaska, and he regales these stories of like performing at Coots like in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there were still a few of these massage parlors, a hop, skip, and a jump from the club itself. Now, ironically, it's where you can buy baby food, but
My, how the times have changed.
Yeah, but
gentrification or what?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but I think that people are starting to sort of realize that like there is something special here, and it is worth documenting and capturing. So anyway, yeah, what else do I do? Just a lot of, public outreach in the city, being involved with a lot of different things. Obviously, culturally, for my people, the Denina of this area and that sort of thing. But it kind of runs the gamut.
I'll be honest, I had not really ever heard of Denina until about 4 or 5 days ago when Cody told me we were gonna film or record this podcast.
Uh-huh.
And so I started looking into it and doing a little bit of research and kind of some of your work. And one thing I've realized is there actually was an Anchorage before there was an Anchorage.
Yep.
And that is just really intriguing to me. And so can you walk us through the history of Anchorage, starting from when it was just animals and trees to what it is now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I grew up here and I had somewhat of a sense, but I realized that there wasn't really any talk or representation of it. And when I When I was 19, I started working at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, and I told other Alaska Natives that, I was from here, and they said, no, where's your village? I said, no, our village is here. Well, what do you mean? I didn't know any Natives lived around here, and I realized, holy shit, we've got a big problem. So I kind of made it my mission to increase that public awareness. But our people are one of 11 Athabascan-speaking people here in Alaska. We're the only ones that lived on saltwater, and we've been here for probably at least 1,000 years. But hunting, fishing, trapping, all the kinds of things that you would imagine. I mean, the whole Anchorage Bowl was forested. Fish camps along the coast, hunting up in the mountains, berry picking. All those sorts of things. And one of the things, although we have this huge sort of metropolis here, there are places where you can go and sort of like just get off the beaten path and like get a sense. Like if you go out to Campbell Creek Science Center, for example, where areas that really haven't been developed, you get a sense like, holy shit, man, there's a lot of woods and
we're still pretty wild here.
We're still pretty wild. Or, when I was a kid, I shouldn't say this, but we used to go, back on the Army base there behind our house, the trails and stuff that, they cut a little swath out, but, they used to go snag fish out of upper, I guess that'd be Upper Chester Creek. It can get pretty wild pretty quick, but Anchorage itself's only a little over 100 years old. By Alaskan standards, it's pretty young. Even Fairbanks is older than Anchorage. Juneau, Kenai, Hope, hell, even Girdwood's actually older than Anchorage, as a sort of a community.
Okay, so what did the Dena'ina community look like here? And where was it?
So the main village was Ataclutna, about 25 miles north of here. And then they had fish camps all up and down every one of the creeks, mouth of Chester Creek, Ship Creek, Campbell Creek. For example, one of the ones that I like to talk to people about is, a lot of people love to go on the coastal trail and go around Westchester Lagoon. Well, most people don't realize that lagoon was created in the 60s by damming up the creek itself. And the creek ran right through there, and the fish camps would have been, along the banks there.
And so that's how they were feeding themselves, was basically just harvesting fish on the various creeks and waterways.
Yeah, fish, moose, berries. All the stuff that we still have, just in greatly sort of reduced numbers. And then, the Dena'ina, are pretty much throughout South Central Alaska. So anywhere today that people are fishing in the past were places that were highly productive areas.
How many people would you say, like, approximately belong to the Dena'ina?
About 5,000, but that's a huge geographic area, going from up around Talkeetna to as far south as Seldovia, all the Kenai Peninsula, across the inlet over in Tyonek, and lower the western part of Cook Inlet around Tuxedni Bay, and then over the mountains into Lake Clark on Lake Iliamna and the Upper Stony River.
And so what united all these people?
We had a common language and a matrilineal clan system. The way I like to explain Athabascans are, you can think of them as, when you say Athabascan, sort of a generic term, it's like saying Scandinavian. So you have the Danes, you have the Swedes, you have the Norwegians. They all have their own sort of identity, but they all speak a related language. So Athabascans are like that. And in a lot of ways, it's very similar to some of the indigenous people in the Sami or the Laplanders in northern Norway, hunting, fishing, trapping, that kind of thing. Also, some sea mammal hunting. The film I did with Alaska Teen Media talked about beluga hunting they used to do. Some seals, not a lot of seals, but some, but a lot of mostly fish, centered around salmon.
In that documentary, the one about belugas that you just mentioned, I'm pretty sure it was you who said that all of the sewage from Anchorage gets dumped into the Cook Inlet.
Yeah, that's correct. Have you ever been on the coastal trail by the treatment plant there?
I thought those were mud flats.
Yeah, I've been down there. Yeah, right next to
that smell?
Westchester, right?
A little further down, but more towards like Point Warren's off. Yeah, kind of between Point Warrenzoff, Point Campbell, Kincaid Park area there. When you walk by, you'll know you can smell the sewage. I mean, that's all going in there. So,
Yeah. I mean, what are the repercussions of that? Like the physical repercussions and even like the psychological repercussions?
well, nobody really knows. I mean, well, the idea is that it somehow, because of the tidal changes, like you're flushing the toilet, I guess, but I don't know. I
Well,
mean,
where else do we put our sewage? I mean, because
not too many places.
Yeah.
We have a special exemption to do that.
But I mean, in general, there's
Well, third world countries do it. But
yeah. So where would say like Seattle, L.A., Portland, these other places? I mean, where does theirs? Do they go to treatment centers?
Well, they treat it a lot more. I mean,
we just dump shit and piss right out there.
Well, what would you call it? The large items, the larger particulate gets filtered, but it's not treated in the sense it's filtered, if that makes sense.
And does that affect? I know that there's less belugas out there
Sure.
than there ever has been. I
Yeah.
mean, does that affect it at all, or
Nobody really knows.
Okay.
I can't see that it helps. I mean, I think there's also, I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think, there's concerns about the drilling, obviously out in the inlet. I think the biggest one though is the lack of king salmon coming back. I mean, that probably is going to be the biggest one. I mean, all you have to do is look at Upper Cook Inlet. King salmon fishing is almost non-existent. When I was a kid, like you'd always hear, load up the case of Coors and we're going to go on the Big Sioux and have a day and bring back a couple, 40, 50 pound kings. That does not exist anymore. Nobody's entirely sure. Some of it is pike predation. Some of it's probably change in temperature. Some of it's probably, what's happening out in the open ocean. But yeah, it's complicated.
I guess kind of switching gears, but not really. So we both read your essay.
Mm-hmm.
This is my story. Tenina. Am I pronouncing that? Tenina no more.
Yeah.
Can you explain Tenina? What is that?
So Tenina is the older spelling of Denina, and so it's got kind of a funny history there. So when the Russians came through, we told them, they said, "Who are you people?" And then we said, "We're Denina." They wrote it down. They also called us Kanaitsi or something of that derivation. And then it went from Russian to the Germans translated it. And then when it got translated from German to English, the T and the D sound get switched. Apparently it's quite common. So it became Tenina, but it had a sense of sort of like, I don't know how to, like creating this sort of division in a sense. Like when I went to school and what little I was taught about Alaska Native history, when they would say, the Tenina Indians that lived around here, and I'd say, well, my grandma says we're Denina. Like it had this sort of destabilizing effect in my mind. Like we couldn't sort of control our own, the way we wanted to be referred to ourselves. I mean, if you go to Kodiak, they used to always be called Aleuts, but now you'd call them Alutiiq or Sikbiak. I think it's much more, we have a much greater nuanced understanding of Alaska. I mean, of course, the obvious one is that all Alaska Natives were Eskimos was, also very common.
In that essay, you talk about your identity as an Alaskan Native. How has understanding your identity as an Alaskan Native shaped you?
I think the biggest thing is, and it kind of comes back to what I was talking about earlier, is this sense that the more I understand about like my sense of place, of being from this place, the more pride I have in it. And like when I look out at those mountains and I realize those are the same mountains that were there 1,000 years ago, gives me a sense, of connecting to a place, like that the history is much deeper, even if we have hotels or shopping malls or office buildings. But I also think for, just Anchorage people or Alaskans in general, I think it also, the more we understand that, and embrace that, the more I think we can come to celebrating what makes this place great, that it doesn't have to be this division, so to speak, that we can, we can be all proud of this place, and that it can shape our identity, and that it's on the one hand, it's complex, but also that it's something worth, celebrating.
Yeah, so you were born here, and I was born here, and Cody was born here, and so we all kind of identify as Alaskan. What separates you having the heritage of people who have been here for so long than, say, us? And I do not mean to ask this in a divisive way, but I know that it has been framed that way to a degree.
Sure. I think what it does is it allows us to have a longer historical perspective on how we can make a better future. I guess that would be my, that if we can learn from some things about sustainability, that when people came here 100 years ago and they looked around and they saw the fish camps and things, and they looked at this sort of untouched, what they thought was an untouched landscape, what they weren't seeing was actually something that had been sustainable for over 1,000 years. The fact that you have some of the largest runs of, you go to the Russian River and fish, that we were able to sustainably harvest those fish for 1,000 years, to manage our wildlife, to use the resources without abusing the resources, I guess would be my way of putting that. And so I think when I think about that is it allows people to understand how we can do things better, to create a place that we want to become fully invested into, because we're here and we're invested in it. I mean, my village corporation is the largest private landholder in the municipality of Anchorage. So we're going to be involved in development one way or the other in perpetuity. We can either work together or we can work divisively.
So are you going to bring some of your historic traditions, values, and norms into the developmental process? Or do you think because you're such a part of the current system that maybe you will lose those?
No, I think we bring the values. I think we identify where are places that we deem worth developing, and where there are places that we deem not worth developing in a way, because we have to live with the consequences. If you're the Pebble Mine, what is your consequence if you fuck it up? If you're Exxon and you spill 11 million gallons into Bly Reef, what's your impact outside of monetary?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, is that you just bring a different perspective than, say, Exxon or the corporations behind Pebble Mine.
Right. And so I think that what it allows is us to have these discussions, because I do think that we have to, use the resources that we have here, but how can we do it in a way that is sustainable, that it's not based on one or two generations? I mean, all the fights we're having right now about, the permanent fund and, should it be enshrined in the Constitution, or what are we going to use it for? And it's this idea of, like, instead of looking at just, how long am I going to be here? It's like thinking about, like, what are my great grandkids going to have to look at and have opportunities to do and to be invested in this place, because it's a magic place. And, I think that is something that we can all come together around and realize that, there are some things that we could be doing more to develop, and there's some things that shouldn't be.
It does seem to me that there's like this mentality of what can Alaska do for me, and not what can I do for Alaska. And I think of just the PFD as a perfect
Absolutely.
example of that.
Right.
I mean, do you know when the PFD was created? Do you know what was the philosophy behind it?
Well, the philosophy behind it was that we're an owner's state, and also the idea was that if you got the money into individual Alaskans' hands, that they would then be able to figure out how they wanted to spend it.
What's an owner's state?
That the resources of Alaska are owned by its citizens. That that it's not privatized, so to speak, because there's very little private property, if you look at Alaska, that exists.
So it sounds to me like that philosophy kind of associates itself with you saying that like the people who are from here are going to know how best to manage it. So if we're going to see some good profits out of this extraction of the oil, if we put that money into the hands of the citizens, it'll be spent in a way that's the best for Alaska.
That it'll drive the economy. Yeah, that it's not the government saying these are the things that need, because before it was in place, I mean, the budgets were just unsustainable. But also, I do believe that the idea was that eventually the oil is going to run out, or that we are going to have to use that for the betterment of our state, and this is, for me personally, one of the things that I get very irritated about is how is it that we're 46th in the country when it comes to education or our university system, and yet we're sitting on $40 billion. To me, is criminal. And the way you build your state is by education.
Mm-hmm.
I agree completely, and that's why I'm just trying to understand this more so I can be better informed, because it seems like the PFD is just tied to our identity as Alaskans so much.
People get so angry when they don't get it. This is something that's given to them.
Right. It's free money. This is what I, tell people. I said, I never care. I don't care what the amount I get every year, because that is the easiest 5 minutes of your life. There's nothing you can do to make that kind of money in 5 minutes. Well, I should say legally.
Unless you're like Rupert Murdoch or something.
Well, no, I know, but for every Alaskan to literally in January to go onto your computer and spend 5 minutes clicking 10 boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they're so entitled to it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess I shouldn't say there because I'm an Alaskan, but I don't understand it.
Well, I think one of the stupidest things they ever did was that they did away with an income tax. Even if we had the lowest income tax in the country at like 1 or 2%, at least we would have some skin in the game for what happens. Because we look at the budgets in Juneau and we say, oh, it's too much, or, oh, they're not spending enough. But where does that really affect our pocketbooks?
Yeah, and maybe that because we don't pay an income tax, does that remove a seat at the table to decide how this money gets spent?
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't it? So then we say, well, we need to raise the oil tax or lower the oil tax. And you're trying to negotiate with like the best lawyers in the world. I mean,
yeah. And does it even matter? Because I mean, the price of oil is so volatile. Are we just going to change these taxes based on the price of oil? I mean, yeah, well,
that's what they do, and so the other one you'll find is that it's like when oil prices are high, they're saying, oh, we have to come together because we can't make it, or we're going to merge. When the oil prices are low, we can't do anything. Like when is there ever that magic spot where they're going to invest in our state? And there is an uptick, but it's minuscule. I mean, why we don't have a gas pipeline is sort of beyond me, and why the state of Alaska didn't just build it or at least become an investor in it. We're waiting for somebody else to do everything for us. We never want to actually step up to the plate. I mean, it's like the kid that freeloads from his parents. Like, when are you going to actually do it? And then the kid gets pissed off when, dad says, well, I'm tired of giving you, $2,000 a month. Here's $1,000. Well, what fuck, what do you mean?
So here's my problem with that too, is that you see a lot of these people complain about their dividend being cut, right? And they're like, well, there's $1,000, off my yearly income or whatever. But what they don't realize is that money was able to make up for a budget deficit and fulfill all these programs. They don't realize that they're actually getting the benefit of thousands upon tens of thousands of dollars of spending on
absolutely.
programs that benefit our society as a whole.
Well, and again, the other part of the reason I believe that we do need to have an income tax is I also realize that for many Alaskans outside of the urban areas, the PFD does represent a larger portion of your overall income. If I'm making $100,000 a year and you want to tax me at 3%, okay, so that's $3,000 a year, right? But if I'm living in Tuntatuliak and I'm making $20,000 from some commercial fishing, maybe some trapping, and the PFD's $2,000, and you cut 1,000 off of that, what's the that's over, that's a 10% reduction right there. So I understand, that there are places in Alaska, and so nobody wants to talk about that. So that's why I think the way to do it is to implement it across multiple. It can't come from one source. It can't just be completely cut from the PFD. It has to come from somewhere else. That we're, in a sense that we all have if we all get this check, we should also all be contributing percentage wise to, what the capital that we have, the people that fought the PFD, or the income tax, who the number one investor was? Bob Gillum, the second richest Alaskan now, because what would a 2% income tax on him, making 30, 40 million be?
And for those who don't know who Bob Gillum is,
he's the head of McKinley Capital. He's an investment banker. He was quick to figure out that because of Alaska's unique location, that you could, using the internet and high-speed data, that you could get to the markets at an earlier point or do trading later in the day. And it's done a lot of investments. There's a whole history. And I'm not begrudging him in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just pointing out that he's done quite well for himself.
I have a potential hypothetical for you if you're
okay.
So you mentioned running out of oil earlier. What happens when we run out of oil?
What happens when we run out of oil? That we can get to, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
We grow up. We've never had to grow up. We became a state in 1959. Right around the time that the state really had to make some really difficult decisions. There's some fishing. Again, liquor tax was one of the biggest contributors. Just at the time that we were sort of having to figure out how are we going to pay for ourselves, what is sustainable, 64 earthquake hit. Put in all this federal dollars. That kind of helped, reconstruction, rebuilding, keeping jobs going, kept things churning along. Just about the time we're going to have to make those hard decisions again, boom, 1968, oil's discovered at Prudhoe Bay. State makes in 1968 $900 million in one day. So much money that they realized that they had to charter a jet to go to San Francisco, because in those days this was all checks having to be deposited. It wasn't bank transfers, to get that into the Federal Reserve, because every minute that money is not sitting in the bank is quite a bit of money that's not being earned on the interest.
Yeah. Wow, that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So, I think, if you were, so it's probably in today's dollars with inflation, imagine if tomorrow we said $3.5 billion, that we have, okay, what are we going to do with that, and how do we, and a much smaller population, I might add, at that point too. So anyways, you have, 68, and then, things are chugging along. The Alaskan Indian Claims Settlement Acts, 1971. The construction on the pipelines takes us through most of the 70s. Oil's turned on in 77, and it goes up. And then, of course, the price crashes because, the amount of banks and lending and strip malls and a speculator boom that came here is sort of unimaginable. So I believe that in some ways, it'll force us to actually have to grow up. There are countries that don't have, they call it the oil curse. And in some ways, we're not completely removed from that. Places like Venezuela, some of the sub-Saharan African countries.
So right now we're like trust fund kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I'm getting from like Cody's question and what you're saying is that the unfortunate reality is that we're not going to figure it out before it's too late, and we're going to have some serious repercussions to force us to shift into a new way to provide for ourselves.
Yeah, and I
We're
think
not going to figure it out before.
I remain hopeful. But I think that, again, I think we're going to have to figure out how do we start to utilize some of the other natural resources we have here.
You know, I'm not hopeful because I'm looking at this current campaign. I'm looking at there's the governor, right?
Right.
We're going to have a new governor. And I just saw this ad, and I think it was from Dunleavy, but I'm not sure.
Probably.
But it was basically like, you don't have to choose. You can have it all. And that was the message, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, no.
I know.
Why?
I know. No, I agree, and it's more of the same. It's like if we can shake the shackles from the federal government. I mean, Anwar, look at the big push for that. And do I think that we could drill in there? Yeah, but I think there's certain spots that we shouldn't. But the gas pipeline, we keep hanging our hat on. In a way, we just sort of like kick the can down the road. You have all these legislators that have decided to retire. Why? Because it's not any fun anymore when you have to make real hard decisions.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's why the power of people. I mean, I'm somewhat hopeful in that. Look at that Walker got elected. That we didn't go with the current model of what Don Young called him, Captain Zero, Parnell.
What does that mean?
I don't know. That's what he called him. He called him Captain Zero. I don't know. It was like he was a nothing when he tried going against Don Young for his seat. But I think that I would hope that people get out and vote and realize that we do have a decision to make here. That is, what kind of future do we want for Alaska? Do we want safety? Do we want roads? Do we want good schools? And are we willing to invest in ourselves? That's the problem, is we refuse to invest in ourselves.
I don't think that people can even envision what that looks like, investing in yourself. They think that investing in myself is getting the PFD, having a good job, and being left the fuck alone.
Right. I mean,
do you know what I mean? Like you talk about education, they're not educated on how important all this whole system is.
Yeah, I get
Awareness is what I'm talking about.
Well, no, I know. I mean, and I know. You're right. It is maddening sometimes, but I think that I just think that that's why our generation, if what we're talking about here about being proud of where we're from and what we want to represent, we want to represent the best version of that. And that is not, God, my shack out in the woods, that it has no trespassing signs, and I mean, there's still room for that in a way, but there's also, we have to be productive citizens, in my opinion, and we have to invest in ourselves. Every other fucking state does it, so why can't we? Except Nevada, I guess. So maybe we legalize gambling. That'll be our next savior.
Metlakatla has a casino, right?
They do have a little casino, yeah.
There's a casino in Alaska?
There is.
Where is this?
It's on a net island down past Ketchikan. A net island's actually the only reservation in Alaska. It goes back to the 1880s.
Okay, so perfect. I kind of want to go and talk more about this casino, but maybe that's for another podcast. Why is there only one reservation on here? And yeah, can you explain that? Sure.
So basically in 1867, so 150 years ago, you have the Treaty of Cessions. The U.S., quote unquote, purchases Alaska for $7.2 million.
Seward's Folly.
2 cents an acre. If you look at what the Russians really did and had, they weren't buying Alaska, and they weren't really interested in buying the whole state, so to speak. The idea was you're buying what Russia's claim to Alaska was, which was mostly along the coast. And in particular, they were interested in the Pribilof Islands, where the fur seals were. What most people don't realize is that within 2 years of the purchase, that $7.2 million was made back on those 2 islands with the furs that came out of there. So it was a pretty good investment. But really, until the gold rush, people started to kind of inhabit more of the interior and throughout, the area, that there wasn't this idea of land ownership and land claim. So they kept putting it off. And then in 1959, when Alaska became a state, the state was allowed to select, I think, 110 million acres of land. And so all of a sudden, the state starts selecting all these pieces, and places where Alaska Native people had always hunted, fished, and trapped were now the state saying, well, no, you can't do that because this is now state land. So they became concerned. There were also these massive federal projects, one called the Rampart Dam. It would have dammed up part of the Yukon River and flooded 10 interior villages to create the U.S.'s largest hydroelectric plant. Luckily, that never went through. You can imagine what that would have done for salmon runs. China went and did that a few years ago. They've got the world's largest hydroelectric.
Yeah,
How did it turn out?
No, that didn't turn out good. I mean, a lot of there was a huge amount of displacement.
Yeah,
in the
20,
millions.
30 million
It's,
people.
Is
Yeah.
that the Three Gorges Dam or
Yeah.
something? Yeah, that's a very terrible, terrible thing.
Yeah. So another project they had was called Project Chariot, where they would have detonated 4 underwater atomic bombs about 20 miles from the village of Point Hope. The idea was that we could have peaceful applications of atomic weapons. And I don't fault them necessarily at the time because they really didn't understand the sort of fallout and radiation. These were also the years when they used to, set off bombs, 50 miles from Las Vegas, and people would get on top of the casinos and watch them go off. But anyways,
there's a book called Firecracker Boys.
yeah,
right?
Firecracker Boys. Yeah, that really documents that history. But you can imagine what that would have done. So Alaska Natives became really concerned. Okay, what is our rights to, our land and protecting our traditional homeland? So you have the formation of the Alaska Federation of Natives on a shoestring budget, trying to fight for retaining something because there were no reservations. And by that point in sort of U.S. history, the reservation model was not a good model because there were no casinos. Very few reservations had any economic activity. I mean, it's pretty pitiful. And the federal government and the state government also realized that they didn't want to have to create, 100 different reservations around the state, and the administration.
And somewhat like those become almost sovereign nations,
Right.
Sovereign territories.
Exactly. So what the compromise is we're going to do this experiment in social capitalism. So we have the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So Alaska Natives retained 44 million acres of land, about 10% of the state. And we're given, or for also waiving land rights, just under $1 billion to be divided among 11 regional corporations and about 200 village corporations. Now, 500 million was to come from the federal government, and 500 million, or approximately that, would have come from the state government. But they had 10 years to give that. And as I was telling you that story about 900 million, going into the bank, they took their sweet time for that 10 years. So it should be pointed out that by the end, $963.5 million is not worth the same in 1981 as it was in 1971.
And whereas if they would have just paid it right away, the same idea, they could have been building interest and it'd just be worth a lot more.
And it was unclear. But the idea was that Alaska Natives own the land in fee simple title. They can buy and sell those lands and develop them within, state and federal laws any way they seem fit. So it's this sort of social capitalism. So it's not a bad idea, but then dealing with the ideas of how do you take care of people, because what most people don't realize is the regional corporations have one mandate in their charter, and that's to make profit for their shareholders, like any other business. That's the only thing they have to do, is make, money. Anything else they feel obligated to do, they should do and want to do and believe in doing, they do, but they don't have to do it. So, and there were a lot of, people that were fighting this to say, what a terrible deal it is and what a giveaway it is. But smart people realized, well, if you get the land into Alaska Natives' hands, again, that's your best shot of being able to develop things like, the Red Dog Mine is probably the biggest example of, a huge sort of industrial project, but there's many others that exist out there. So,
Can you just real quick explain the Red Dog Mine in context to what we're talking about?
well, it's the world's largest zinc mine up in Northwest Alaska. And, I tell people we need more projects like that. I mean, some environmentalists would argue that it's the most polluted district in the country and that. But if I was a NANA shareholder and I lived in Buckland or Kayana, and you told me I could go work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off and make $70,000, $80,000 a year and be in my village, like, that's the dream, I think. I mean, Jesus, like, you'd be able, as long as you don't get into trouble, have a clean piss test, but anything you want to do subsistence wise, brand new snow machines, brand new boats.
But is that this is the model you're saying, but is that a model that just does it benefit the entire state, or is it just?
Oh, absolutely, it does. Yeah, but they pay huge taxes, and I should also mention that one of the things that was set up in the land claims was that 70% of the subsurface revenues that are generated get distributed among the other 11 regional corporations. So every year, NANA only keeps 30% of their profit on that mine. Now they get to deduct for their shareholders, so we'll say it's like 34%. But the other 66%, that gets spread out to all the other regional corporations. And a lot of them, especially for village corporations, a portion of their annual dividends that are paid out come out of that money. Now, some reinvest it, some do all sorts of things. So it does have this effect that definitely spreads the wealth that you're not seeing from an Exxon or ConocoPhillips.
Well, I'll tell you, before talking to you tonight, I didn't know anything about kind of how these were created, what were the reasons, and you kind of made me into a believer as far as like, I grew up living with a lot of Alaskan natives in school and stuff, and one thing I noticed is that, they wouldn't travel out of state as much. They felt a real connection to this place. And what I'm getting at here is that when you put a lot of the control of our development into people who have a strong connection to the place, they might actually be able to take care of it the best.
Yeah.
Or at least they need to have a good say.
Yeah. I would agree. Yeah,
I would agree.
And I mean, that's just not something that I had thought about or considered prior to tonight, so thanks.
No problem.
To close this out here, I read that you know the Dena'ina language. Are there any sayings, axioms, or proverbs in Dena'ina that you could tell us?
Well, I think I'll leave on one of my favorite. It's a place name, and it's called Nunleskadi. And what that translates to is rotten land. And where that is? Well, that's near Earthquake Park. So all those houses that were built over there that went down in the 1964 earthquake, if they had asked the Dena'ina, they would have told them that that's not a good place to build. But we weren't asked, and so, a lot of mansions went down in the 1964 earthquake there, but Nunleskadi, rotten land.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
That's funny.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron.
No problem. Yeah, it's been great.
Super informative.
Yeah, Aaron, that was great, and this was a lot of good, important information that I think Alaskans need to hear.
Sure, yeah, and if anytime you want me back, I'd be happy to.
Dude, that was awesome. You can support local grassroots journalism at patreon.com/Crude Magazine. If you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a platform that makes it easy for you to support content that matters to our community for as little as $1 a month.
Crude Conversations is written, hosted, and produced by Cody Liska and Dustin H. James for Crude Magazine. Intro music was produced by Alcoda Beats.